Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Alliance for Housing Solutions webinar on accessory dwellings in Arlington. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Michelle Winters. I'm the Executive Director of the Alliance for Housing Solutions. Today, we're going to hear from 4 experts on accessory dwellings. The first is Ileana Schinder, who's an architect out of Silver Spring. We have Matt Lee from the Lee Design Studio in Urban Cottage here in Virginia. Tracy from Backyard Cottages, also in Virginia, and Blake Bowen, the Arlington County Planner, who is most familiar with accessory dwelling units and also the Assistant Zoning Administrator for the county. After their presentations, we will go into a Q&A period and we'll share some resources. But first, I'd like to explain a little bit about who we are and an overview of accessory dwellings. So, the Alliance for Housing Solutions is a nonprofit that works here in Arlington and Northern Virginia to increase the supply of affordable housing through public education, policy development, advocacy, and innovation. And so we have been involved in this accessory dwelling work since the earlier days of even trying to get them allowed in the first place. So we're very excited to be moving into the implementation phase to try to create some accessory dwellings in Arlington. So what is an accessory dwelling? Well, a very basic definition is that an accessory dwelling is an independent living unit with a kitchen, a bathroom, and a separate entrance that is either within a single-family home or on the same property as a single-family home. So those are also known as granny flats, in-law suites, garage apartments, carriage houses, any number of names. In Arlington, the acronym ADU, which is often used to describe accessory dwelling units, is also used in the legal code of Virginia to mean affordable dwelling unit. So sometimes in order to prevent confusion between the two, in Arlington you'll hear people refer to an accessory dwelling as just AD. So an AD is an accessory dwelling and an ADU is an affordable dwelling unit. But most of the time people know what you're talking about when you're talking about ADUs, whether you use ADU or AD. So just a little bit of confusion there. Why should we be creating accessory dwellings? Well, first of all, for the homeowner, there are a number of benefits. You can have housing for a family member in that unit, a service provider, a renter, a friend of the family, any number of things. A small household can live in the accessory dwelling, or the homeowner can even move into the accessory dwelling and rent the home to another, again, family member or other tenant who is able to pay a larger amount for the larger space. All of these arrangements can really help with aging in place. So for homeowners who have owned their homes for quite some time and are not interested in leaving, an accessory dwelling unit would allow them to have another person or household on the property. And that helps them for just having another set of eyes and ears around, or if that person is officially helping them. And like I said, the homeowner can also move into the smaller space so that the larger space can be lived in by a different family. And in the case of renting one out, it provides a second source of income that can be really helpful for just paying the bills. So for the community, an accessory dwelling unit is one of those things that can help create the additional housing supply that we need to solve some of our housing challenges that we have in Arlington and the region. We have a shortage of housing, and so we need to try to provide new housing in new and different ways, and accessory dwellings are a potential, they have a lot of potential for solving some of these housing challenges. They're naturally more affordable because by regulation they are required to be small. They also don't have a large number of amenities that, say, a high-rise apartment building would have with elevators and pools and yoga studios. So there's a number of reasons that they end up being more naturally affordable. Adding housing through accessory dwelling units is often referred to as kind of a gentle density, in the sense that you really can't see it in a neighborhood. It doesn't change the form and character physical character of that neighborhood. And so this is kind of invisible or gentle density that can be added in single family neighborhoods. And by adding these units in single family neighborhoods, it helps provide more housing options in more places than would otherwise be available, particularly in those areas that otherwise would only be available for large single family homes. It provides some rental units that are smaller for a greater variety of housing in those areas. So what's allowed in Arlington? Well, we have been at work on this for over 12 years. Back in 2008, after a multi-year process of trying to figure out what to do, the county passed its first accessory dwelling ordinance. And that one allowed only what were known as internal accessory dwellings. So that's on the portion of the picture on the right that shows attic, internal, addition, or basement. So anything that was attached to or part of the main single family home. That was allowed starting in 2008. But there were a lot of restrictions and rules around how to create one of those. And so during the period in the 10 years following the passage of that rule, there were only about 20 of those that were created in Arlington. So it definitely was much harder to create them than I think people had intended when the rule was created. And so we took another look at it in 2017 through a working group. That working group worked on some recommendations to try to reduce some of the difficult rules in the existing ordinance, as well as to try to see if there were some options that we could provide for detached accessory dwellings. So that would be like the backyard cottage type idea. And so in 2017, we did start allowing in Arlington. The county board approved many of the changes to the internal structures to streamline and simplify the process of providing internal accessory dwelling units. And it also at that time in 2017 started allowing the retrofit of existing detached structures, but it did not at that time allow new detached structures. So we revisited again in 2019 to try to tackle the new detached structure question. And so we're successful in doing that in around this time last year, in 2019. So now all of these types are allowed in Arlington, and we're very excited to try to get the industry and homeowners rolling on creating some more of these units. So there are a number of rules that apply to accessory dwellings. Some of those rules come from the planning and zoning ordinance, and other rules come from the building code. And rather than going through the details here, I know that Blake Bowen, one of our speakers, is going to be getting at some of these things, and I know that Ileana is going to be covering a lot of the building code issues. So let's just say that there are a number of rules, and part of one of the things that you'll need to do as you get started in this is to try to understand how these rules apply to your property. And so we'll give you some advice on that. And there are a number of ways to attack the accessory dwelling problem in terms of figuring out how to create one on your property. So you could start from scratch, go with the custom approach. That's really the only option if you're doing something internal to your home. So taking a look, perhaps working with an architect, doing some custom building and retrofitting of that space. You can also take that approach for an external ADU or AD. You can also find some existing plans if you're looking at a cottage in the backyard, for instance, and hire a builder that can build those plans. We're going to be hearing today about some ready-to-build models or turnkey models where the designs are already complete and the builders have their systems ready and can build them on your lot. And we're also going to hear a little bit today about modular options. There are also some new organizations that have been popping up in our area that can be facilitators of the process. So if you don't really know what's allowed or where to start, you can submit a request and they can help do some basic feasibility analyses, and we will talk a little bit about that as well. Okay, so let's get started. We're going to start today with Ileana Schinder. So welcome, Ileana. It's nice to have you with us.
My name is Ileana Schinder. I'm an architect here in Washington, D.C. I do a lot of residential architecture, and about half my portfolio is additional dwelling units in the shape of basements and freestanding structures or renovated structures that function as additional dwelling units. Most of those are for long-term rental, but some of those are operated sometimes as short-term rental or occupied by family members or staff like au pairs. So what I'm going to talk about today is the way that the building code looks at these additional dwelling units from a permit perspective. Just to clarify, every time you do an additional dwelling unit or a additional structure that's going to be occupied as a residence, there are two codes that you need to follow. Number one is a zoning code that the people from Arlington will talk about later, and that regulates what happens between your house and the neighboring houses. So things like setbacks, things like occupancy of the lot. What I'm going to talk about is the building code, is all the rules that you need to follow from your building to the inside. It has to do with safety, with security, with lighting and mechanical. So we're going to go sort of as a checklist of things that you may want to look at when you're thinking about either freestanding structure that's going to be new or a renovated space that you may already have. You'll see a lot of these comments are illustrated with basement images because basements happen to be the most restrictive. But if you have a basement or if you're thinking about excavating the one you have and converting into a dwelling unit, this is a very sort of quick way to look at it of what you comply with already and what things you need to change. So let's get started. The first thing is, of course, head clearance. You need a 7-foot head clearance for habitable spaces, such as living spaces and bedrooms. Don't worry if you have beams or ducts or things that go below 7 feet. The code is quite permissible, how low you can go for portions of your ceiling. So these also applies, of course, for freestanding structures. The next thing you want to think about is egress and access. Of course, you need a main door, but also for all living spaces, mainly bedrooms, you need a minimum size of windows. You need at least those windows to comply with certain widths and height and seal. Just for you to picture it, the window of a bedroom must comply if there's an emergency and a fireman needs to get in fully equipped. So when you see those tiny windows that have a weird way of operating, those windows are normally not compliant, so that room cannot be called a bedroom. This is very important on renovated basements, but also when you think about converting sometimes a renovated porch that the windows were sort of thrown in, look at this is very easy to Google as well. Egress windows for bedrooms, because the image is very, very clear. Also, we can probably share all these slides with you later. And I think it's important to know, according to a residential code, this is something we can talk with Arlington later, the mechanical system needs to be separate between units. An easy way to remember this rule is units should not share air. So if one dweller wants to cook fish, the other one shouldn't have to smell it. This means that you need separate heating and cooling, and also for maintenance purposes, this is really important. So if you want to set your thermostat at a certain temperature, it shouldn't affect the dweller from the other structure. It's very easy to understand for a freestanding structure, but if you have attached dwelling spaces or basement and upstairs, this is very important to have clear that the mechanical system will have to be separate. There are a lot of technicalities to it that we can discuss in a case by case, but just remember, the living conditions of both dwellers shouldn't interfere with each other. The same rule goes for electrical. Each unit will need to have its own sub-panel. The code is fairly strict on this, that the switches and the circuits must be going to its own panel within its own living space. So if there's an emergency, you can easily shut off a certain circuit if you need to do a repair without going into the other person's house. The next one is plumbing. Each unit, this is kind of silly obvious, but each unit needs to have its own plumbing facilities. The code is more permissible on sharing hot water facilities, but still the hot water system should not be encased within one unit. It can be off of a vestibule, it could be off of a shared space, but if you need to do a repair, if you need to replace something, the hot water heater should not live within one unit altogether. So you can do it off of a corridor or have separate systems altogether. This is very important, fire separation. This is where zoning and building rules overlap. How the unit you're creating keeps a safe distance or a safe fire separation from the attached unit, think a vertical wall, or the distance from the neighbor, or how you divide basement from upstairs. Normally, just a continuous drywall partition is enough, so it's nothing too sophisticated. The wall and sprinkles still out there to see who needs it and who doesn't, depending on a lot of technical variabilities. But just for you to know that if you're going to create a dwelling unit in your property, safety and security, such as fire separation, is very important to comply with the code. The architect or the builder that you work with will be familiar with this, so don't panic about the details on your particular project. Also, the building code is fairly clear, but not very strict on what certain areas mean for each space. The one that should concern you the most is because you have the least flexibility is the bedroom. You need 70 square feet, 7 feet clear in one direction. All the rest of the spaces are pretty open. You can, creatively distribute open spaces. And then there are details on headrooms and stairs and clearances around equipment and plumbing fixtures. Again, this is very common for professionals. So normally when you lay it out, particularly if it's new, you'll have to comply. If it's a renovation, there's certain things you may have flexibility with. The next thing is equipment. A dwelling unit must have must have cooking and refrigerating facilities. There's no hard requirements on sizes of equipment. So just be creative when you choose cooking equipment. Fortunately, now there's lots of different sizes you can choose. So this looks normal, but everything is significantly smaller than a normal kitchen. But it works. It's a basement in Capitol Hill. Again, energy code is something else that you may want to pay attention to, particularly if you retrofit a space. It has to do with energy consumption and energy waste. It's a good thing to do, but also a thing you must do. Each county enforces these rules slightly differently, but make sure that you talk with the professional that will be developing your property to make sure that you comply with this as well, particularly with products that are not familiar with our region. It's like, it's not something, a dwelling is not something that you can easily buy off of the internet, like one would buy like a coloring book or something. So make sure that when you're looking at a prefab structure that is not familiar with our local rules, that you comply with this one as well, because this is not universal throughout the US. And this is a few ideas. There's a freestanding garage that I renovated last year. This was in the Washington Post as well. It has to do with efficiency, how well you use the space you have. So this is like a golden rule for additional dwelling units, because space is one thing nobody has. Next thing is natural light. Nothing will make a space look bigger and more generous than natural light. Openness as well, how you distribute the uses inside the space will allow you to do more with the little bit you may have. And the next one is, this is the renovated garage that I was illustrating. And this is the end. It's very, very quick, but I hope I didn't go over too much. And that's me.
Thank you, Ileana. That's great. So our next speaker is going to be Matt Lee. Matt, while you are getting your presentation up, go ahead and hit share. I've unmuted you.
Hey, Michelle,
Great.
thanks. You guys see my screen?
We can see the full thing. So you'll have to hit presentation mode. There you go. Perfect.
Great, set. Thanks, Ileana. Thanks for a good job giving an overview of the design considerations and the code requirements. There is a lot to consider for the ADs and just general design. Michelle did a great job of evaluating the different configurations for ADs and some of the other design considerations. I'm going to focus on the turnkey detached version of that today. My name is Matt Lee. I'm with Urban Cottage. I'm an architect, teamed up with a group of local housing professionals to focus on these ADs. We created a business dedicated to that. And we started the group because we see ADs as a potential solution for the missing middle and really want to make it more mainstream. Urban Cottage sees this as happening by making it affordable and streamlined. And we want a one-stop shop for clients to only deal with one company for their project. And we want to make it affordable. We'll make it affordable and see that this way is a lot faster and more efficient. We've created 3 designs that are tailored to maximize the allowable size of Arlington's zoning code. We think they're a great offering for clients to get started and to make this a possibility. The first question we really get asked is, how does this work? The initial evaluation period, we walk through the design considerations, site considerations for Arlington specifically, and look at a client's lot and do a high-level review of those considerations. We've worked through about 16 to 20 different sites at this point, and got some good leads on things, and think we've got some sites that work for about 4 or 5 of those. There are a lot of considerations and constraints that go into it. So that's something that's going to be site specific, and we can definitely help with that. Once we've sifted through those site constraints, we move on to the fun part, the design selection. We've got, like I said, 3 models that we think fit the design aesthetic for Arlington and some of the demand we're seeing for those designs. And so while the designs are complete, there's still some work to be done to connect to the house, which is the hard part, is getting into the house, making sure all those connections and utilities work with the design and for the site. And for each house is going to be different. So once we complete that, we're with Arlington to work through the permits and start construction. Once we have the construction started, it's about 5 months to get these built and everything cleaned up. So about to get Zoom bombed here. Once we get those built and everything, we can move in. So wanted to highlight some of the models we have put together. This is our Craftsman model. We think it's a classic kind of look. We see it around Arlington a lot, and this is what we think will be a great seller for us. It's a lofted floor plan, so we have the option to have that second bedroom upstairs in these dormers, and able to change the color up a little bit to match the existing house. We think this will be a big seller for us. The farmhouse, it's a fun look. It's really in demand right now. We're seeing a lot of people want this in my own practice for single family as well as the ADs to fit some of the styles people are seeing these days. And then we also have the mid-century modern, kind of a contemporary take on the AD. It's 1 story, lots of glass, high ceilings, and some more contemporary materials that make it really pop. So we're excited about those, and we're excited about the potential that ADs have for Arlington to provide gentle density and for the missing middle. If you'd like to contact us, our website has more information, and we've got a form on there to be able to fill out for you to get more information and for us to do that site evaluation for your project. Thanks for the time.
Thank you very much, Matt. So we are going to go to Pierce Tracy next. And Pierce, if you can work on sharing your slides. Pierce is with Pierce is with Backyard Cottages, and he will be walking us through his products.
Great, thank you, Michelle, and Matt and Ileana. Really appreciate all the information. I'm excited to be on this panel. My name is Pierce Tracy, and I'm the president of Backyard Cottages. Backyard Cottages is a sister company of Classic Cottages, and at Classic Cottages, we build and have built new homes in Arlington County for the last probably 8 to 9 years. So we do 20 to 25 homes a year, or have done in Arlington probably the last 3 or 4 years, and we're pretty familiar with you know, all the regulations, have a strong network of subcontractors, professional services, engineering, and all of that. So for us, we really had really begun to see changes in, you know, going back to 14 and 15 even, in what people wanted in single family homes, whether it was eliminating living rooms and doing in-law suites. Elevator options were becoming you know, more requested from people. And you know, kind of fast forward a little bit to the ordinance that was created in 2017 with basement accessory dwelling units. We did our first basement accessory dwelling unit in 2018. And so really in kind of looking back as the shift has really kind of gone over the last 5 or 6 years, it feels like, towards separate living space, co-living in a same, you know, in single family on the same lot. We thought it was fantastic that Arlington took the initiative to do the detached accessory dwelling units, which was finalized last year, and Blake Bowen, who's going to speak next, or obviously at the county, did a great job kind of leading that program, and I know Michelle and others separately as well. So, you know, for us, and really kind of looking at our business, we felt like this was a large opportunity for folks, and whether it's a family member that you're planning for in the future, or if you want to rent it out in the short term, the uses are really very compelling. And especially now, even with the COVID crisis going on and everything, thinking about mom being in a retirement home or one of these other places, I think if anything, it makes it more compelling for somebody to want to plan to do one of these units, you know, to have a place for mom to stay in the future. So we think it's a large opportunity, and we've just actually completed our first 2 units, or are completing in the next week or two, our first 2 detached new units in Arlington, and we have 2 new detached units that are either in planning or permitting with Arlington County. So to get into the products a little bit, and the first few units that we're doing are our site-built options. So we've done one of our 556 1-bed, 1-bath. It's a 1-story unit, and one of our 1.5, or call it 2-story units, 2-bed, 1-bath. And so we're completing one of each of those, and then we've got another one of each of those in planning and permitting coming up soon. The thing that we're really excited about is the modular solution, and you know, obviously the site-built work, you know, we plan on investing further into as well. But there's some really cool stuff going on in kind of nationwide as far as innovation and things that can be done if, you know, we use a factory-built practice as opposed to a site-built practice. And so I want to get to the Urban unit. So we have, we've partnered with a company called Urban out of Michigan. They're probably, I would call, a small space living expert, and another company, Skyline Champion, who's a publicly traded company who does manufactured housing. And so they've been really looking at getting into this space, the modular space, and had been doing a lot of units on the West Coast. And so we ended up, working with them over the last 8-10 months, and we're excited to get this first Urban unit here to the Arlington area in the next couple of months. So we'll have more information on our website, social media, as far as exact timing and location of that. But here's a photo on this slide of one of the insides of this unit. To talk a little bit more about this unit in specific, the Urban kind of mantra is 5 living spaces in one area. And so really having Urban has patents on specific items, one of them being a movable wall system with wireless power components. And so we've got this Urban unit that we'll have and on display here this summer. We'll be able to showcase that for people to be able to walk through and see kind of the quality and innovation of these units firsthand. So if you could see in the photos, really this is, you've got a movable wall system where you could collapse it back into against the wall and create more living space. And for, now we're maybe, if you're renting the space out, maybe, your tenant wants to work from home during the day, it really just creates an opportunity to add additional square footage by being able to collapse the Murphy bed up against the wall and then be able to reuse that space. So there'll be more information on that coming soon. So what is modular construction? I know everybody probably has questions or assumptions with modular construction, and whether it's cheap, how does it work, any of that. Effectively, we are building in this context, we'll have, call it 70 to 80% of the work being done in a factory in Pennsylvania. And a lot of the really hard technical components, Matt mentioned it earlier, utility tie-ins, all those components, foundation work, and then access to be able to get the modular unit back to it, are the logistical components that we would kind of tie into the offsite manufacturing. Does modular mean cheap? I think modular manufacturing, people get confused. Obviously, anything can be cheap if it's site built or modular, but the quality in getting our standards in the products of our outside partners has been really important for us, and we've been working kind of for months with them on making sure that we've got the windows that we want in the units, and the insulation and some of the other components that we would ask or we would do in our site build units. As far as feasibility, we would estimate probably 30 to 40% of single family sites, and it's probably closer to 30, will work for a modular solution. That really is an estimate at this point. It really comes down to power lines, locations of trees, other components, obviously with the house and the lot size and the other kind of zoning requirements. But if you're interested in figuring out if modular works for you, we'd be happy to talk to you. I also have a little bit more about some of the press releases in my slide with more information on that. We'll also have more information on our website, as I mentioned, and social media in the next weeks or month or so on that. So we're really excited about that. Obviously, we do the site build work as well, but we're excited to showcase that model. Thank you.
Thank you, Pierce. Thanks so much. Our next speaker is going to be Blake Bowen. I'm unmuting you. So Blake, while he is sharing his slides, I will share that he is the planner from Arlington County, and he's the assistant to the zoning administrator as well. So he knows all the details. And we are looking forward to hearing a little bit from him about what some of those rules are. Great.
All right, good morning.
There you go.
My name is Blake Bowen, the zoning expert, so to speak, on accessory dwellings with the zoning administrator in Arlington County. I started working on accessory dwellings approximately 4 years ago. So in that span, I've picked up quite a bit of knowledge. I've worked with some of our panelists before. I've worked with Matt and Pierce on developing accessory dwelling models that meet Arlington County zoning standards. And so I'd be happy to work with anyone else that happens to be in the meeting and is taking an interest as well. So when you're getting started with an accessory dwelling project, the first thing we want to enforce in pretty much every case, we would love for you to come into Arlington County and do a code consultation. These meetings are free, and we involve both the Inspection Services Division, who oversee the building code, as well as the zoning division staff who oversee the zoning ordinance. You can do a code consultation meeting at any point in the process. You can be, just starting the design process, or you can be, halfway through. We generally find it works best if you have a little bit of a sense of you want to do, even if it's a hand-drawn sketch, and you want to see if that meets our zoning standards and building code requirements. We'll be happy to take a look and let you know. The best way to set up a code consultation meeting is to email us at Contact Zoning. That email will get forwarded to me, and we'll find a time that works for you. Right now, with county government offices generally being closed, we are doing our code consultation meetings virtually. We do probably 3 or 4 a week. We did one this morning, so they're going well. And like I said, Matt and Pierce have participated as well. I hope it was successful. They might tell you otherwise, but I think they went pretty well. And generally, we have a pretty good outcome from those, and people's designs ultimately get maybe tweaked a little bit, but we find a way to make the design work and get approved. A little bit of background on the accessory dwelling process, and this is a little bit repetitive about what Michelle has told you already, but the regulations have been on the books for approximately 12 years now. The first round of regulations was pretty limiting, so it's been an iterative process with loosening those and kind of finding the right balance of allowing accessory dwellings while also understanding community concerns about the size, the shape, the added density, the number of cars on the street, and so forth. So as part of the Affordable Housing Master Plan in 2015, the idea was that we wanted to expand our inventory of accessory dwellings, because in about the first 7 to 8 years, we'd only received about 20 applications total, and we might get up to 40 a year. So the regulations definitely needed to be loosened up to allow to have more approvals. So in 2017, we loosened them up. One of the regulations got loosened up was the size of a basement unit. We do not restrict the size of an accessory dwelling that is wholly located within a basement. And at that time, probably the most famous regulation that got added up to the books was the idea that you could convert an existing structure to an AD. At that point, we did not yet allow the new ADs to be built from the ground up. The county board wanted a little bit more research on that, on what the appropriate setbacks might be. So a couple of years later, in May 2019, we finally got around to that. And at that point, we got to our regulations that are in place today, where you can build a new ground up accessory dwelling. So as of May 2019, the use standards that zoning looks at for accessory dwellings got updated, and they are largely recorded here on the screen. The maximum height of accessory dwellings is the lesser of 1.5 stories and 25 feet. And I will go in on the next slide and tell you a little bit about 1.5 stories, because that tends to be a confusing regulation for a lot of people. In the different zoning districts, we have different footprint sizes. So that's basically the size of the foundation, more or less. In the R5 and R6 districts, we're looking at 560 square feet. In all other residential districts, we're looking at 650 square feet. Setbacks is another primary issue we look at. If your accessory dwelling is located wholly within your main dwelling, the house you live in, the setbacks are no different than they would be if you're building your house without an AD. Generally, that's 25 feet setbacks in the front and rear yard and 10 feet setbacks on the side. But if you're building a detached structure, there's a different set of setback requirements. We're looking at an 8-foot separation between the main dwelling and the house. We're looking at a 25-foot setback from any street. So if you're on a corner lot, that's 2 streets that you have to be 25 feet from. If you're on an interior lot and only have frontage on 1 street, you have to be 5 feet from the side and rear property lines. So that can be pretty much tucked in the corner of the backyard. If you're on a corner lot and you have frontages on 2 streets, maybe 3 streets, depending on the configuration, you can be 5 feet from any side lot line and 10 feet from the rear lot line. The maximum size, as I mentioned before, there's no GFA cap in the basement. If your accessory dwelling is entirely in the basement, accessed generally by an areaway or an exterior stairway, you can go as big as the basement size is. So if you have a 1,000 square foot basement, your accessory dwelling can fit 1,000 square feet. If your accessory dwelling is located anywhere else, the size is, I would say in most cases, capped at 750 square feet. There's technically a ratio we look at. The accessory dwelling cannot be more than the 35% of the combined GFA of the main dwelling and the accessory dwelling. So an example of that would be if you have a 1,000 square foot main dwelling and you're proposing a 500 square foot accessory dwelling, the combined GFA would be 1,500 square feet, and 500 is about 1/3 of 1,500 square feet. Therefore, that would be acceptable. We look at that regulation. We can look at that regulation a little bit more closely in a code consultation meeting because it can depend a lot on different layouts of your house. We generally do count an attic and a basement towards the GFA of the main dwelling. So as I mentioned, the 1.5 story requirement tends to be pretty confusing. It's one of the main topics we get questions on in our code consultation meetings. For zoning, there's 3 attributes that define a structure as 1.5 stories versus 2 stories. They relate to the knee wall and the dormers. So the knee wall, which is the wall supporting the roof on the upper level, you can see an illustration on the left side of this slide, can be no more than 2 feet in height. The next regulation is the dormer itself has to be less than 50% of the width of the overall roof. So in this case, we have a roof line that is 22 feet wide and the dormer is 10 feet wide, therefore it's less than 50%. And the last requirement we look at is that the dormer needs to be set back 6 inches from the main wall below, and you can see that setback on the illustration on the left here. This next slide shows kind of a visualization of what a detached accessory structure with an accessory dwelling in it can look like. There was a lot of thought put into the setbacks and the bulk and the massing and the density of these detached accessory structures, and we hope to balance community concerns with what generally homeowners would want. And this is kind of the compromise we reached. It can be a pretty sizable structure, but that can be very good for a renter. We would also look at it in the code consultation to make sure that the overall lot coverage of a proposal is met and that the parking requirements are met for the property. This slide is repetitive, and that's that's purposeful. We want to really hammer home the point that you should come in for a code consultation. Again, it's a free service. We do it several times a week. We're pretty quick about it. Our meetings generally last 30 minutes to an hour, and we can customize the meeting to answer any specific questions or concerns you have. And we're happy to do that pretty much any day of the week, 9 a.m. to 4:30 p.m. Once you do the code consultation process, here's a little bit of a brief overview of how the application process itself works. As was mentioned previously in this presentation, there's 2 main permits you're going to want for any accessory dwelling project. That's the AD permit. That's just reviewed by zoning staff in the county, and we ensure compliance with the use standards. That's the height we mentioned, the footprint we mentioned, the size we mentioned. And then there's the building permit, which goes through review by the Inspection Services Division to ensure compliance with the building code. It goes through additional round of zoning review, and that's where we look at things like lot coverage and parking. And it also goes through review by the county's Department of Environmental Services, and they look at issues such as stormwater management. The AD permit is typically completed within 30 days, while the building permit takes about a 10-day review cycle. So for that reason, we recommend generally that if you can, submit your AD permit in advance of the building permit, and that way they can line up. So maybe, you know, 2 weeks before you submit your building permit, submit the zoning permit, the AD permit to county zoning staff. The AD permit must be approved before the building permit can be approved. There's a document within the AD permit application called the Declaration of Covenants. And we will withhold review, or we will withhold issuance of the building permit until the Declaration of Covenants is recorded in county land records. The idea of the Declaration of Covenants is if the property is ever sold, a future landowner would be notified of the entitlements and restrictions on the property based on having this additional use. In terms of the manual process of getting the AD permit application to us, especially during county government closure with the COVID crisis, we are accepting submission via email or via snail mail. Generally, the PDFs are scanned and sent to this zoning admin address, and we are also accepting online payment at this time. Building permit applications are generally submitted electronically via e-plan review, and that's the process that has about a 10-day review cycle. So that brings me to the close of my slides. I'll pass it back to Michelle, and I believe we'll get into the question and answer session now.
Hi, everybody. Yep, I'm unmuting all of the panelists, and we're going to go into some Q&A. Some quick ones that came in specifically for Blake while you were talking. There's a couple questions about what the parking requirements are. Can you address that one first?
Yes, absolutely. So an accessory dwelling does not have any separate parking requirements versus the main dwelling. The parking is assessed for the property as a whole. So generally for a one-family detached dwelling, you're looking at a parking requirement of 1 parking space off-street. There is a possibility that if you don't have 1 parking space on the property and you don't wish to create one, you can do a parking survey through the Department of Environmental Services. Thus far, we have only done 1 of those ever in, you know, roughly 12 years of having the regulations on the books. So only people are able to provide parking on the property.
Great. And the next question for you specifically is it possible to get a variance from the county setback requirements?
So in most cases, no. I mentioned that there's an 8-foot separation requirement between the main dwelling and the detached accessory dwelling structure. That requirement that the Board of Zoning Appeals could give a use permit exception for. The other setback requirements, and that's like from the 5 foot from the side and rear property lines, they are considered a use standard, and the Board of Zoning Appeals does not have the authority to modify use standards. Only the county board can do that.
Okay, so another question is about, does the homeowner need to obtain a variance? And I think this means in general, but they are by right, which means that all you need essentially is the building permits and the accessory dwelling permit, correct?
Yep, that's right. They are by right standards, so as long as you meet the use standards in Article 12.9.2 of the zoning ordinance, it's not a special exception. You don't have to go through an additional process.
Okay, great. Some of our other questions that we have are about cost. And I know that Ileana has addressed some of the cost questions in the written responses, but maybe we can go to Matt and Pierce for whatever information you guys are able to share on the general costs of some of the approaches that you use.
You go first, Pierce?
You can go first. Go ahead.
Sure. So we have 3 models. Right now, we're working through the exact costing, but what we're calling the floating house cost is about $165 for the first 2 models, the farmhouse and the craftsman. $165,000, and then plus site conditions. We'd love to be able to give a flat rate, but it's just not possible with the different variations in site. So you're looking at between 10 to 40,000, depending on your site conditions, whether it's sloped, distance from the house, whether it's a deep lot that you're having to have longer connections. How many bathrooms you have in the house, that's another piece of it that we might not have touched on, is upgrading the water line. So if it's a distance away, or if it has a certain number of bathrooms in the house, then we need to upgrade the water line when we add that additional draw on the water system. So that's something to evaluate. So all these go into that high level review at the beginning of our process to put it together.
Great, thank you. And the number that you shared, the 165, was that for a 1-bedroom or a 2-bedroom, or what is the general square footage of the one that you quoted there?
The farmhouse and the Craftsman right now are at 750 square feet, the maximum size. We have a lofted bedroom upstairs, and then we have a 1-bedroom, 1-bath downstairs. So it's a 2-1 configuration,
Okay.
and that gives us kind of the maxed out flexible design for Arlington. Okay,
and so Pierce, it's your turn. And the questioner was asking specifically about 1-bedroom. I know that you said you have one of each. So if you could talk about both.
So the numbers are pretty close to what Matt said. I'd probably say 180 to 220-ish, 200 roughly, round numbers if you want to think about site conditions. But the one big variable, like Matt mentioned as well, if you have to upgrade your water service, I believe it's a $3,700 fee to Arlington County for the permit. And for us, I think it cost us an extra $2,500 for needing for our subcontractor to actually do that work. And so that's a small example. On our first two projects, one of our units didn't have to upgrade the water line, one did. And, that's, $6,000 right there on basically an upgrading of the meter and the water line size from the street to the house. And so the site conditions can vary pretty wildly depending on, what's around, and if there's hopefully no trees need to be removed or anything like that, but what we need to work around the existing site conditions and then elective landscaping that the client may want afterwards.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you guys for sharing that info. On the cost question, somebody has asked, how much does the survey cost?
We're seeing prices between $1,000 and $2,000 for the survey, depending on the size of the lot and the required components of the survey.
Before we go to the next question, I wanted to just let everybody know that all the questions that we do get, we're going to answer them either live, or if we run out of time, we'll answer them in writing and we'll share that with all the participants afterwards. The next question is about financing. How are your clients financing these structures?
I can jump in on that. I think that's one of the biggest challenges right now. And if we've done both with a new home, doing a detached accessory dwelling unit and a standalone detached accessory dwelling unit for somebody who is not building a new home at the same time. And so it's been a little bit easier, to be honest with you, to roll up into a new loan if somebody was building a new house and an accessory dwelling unit at the same time, and get the appraiser through a local bank relationship to effectively count the square feet in the accessory dwelling unit, add it to what was in the main house, and that's the appraisal value. If you talk to some lenders and from national banks, the challenge has been over the years, and I think that it's starting to break on the lending side, is that they had treated these more like pools where they had no value. So now you're looking at home equity line of credits, cash, those types of things. But I'm pretty certain, or it feels like there's more acceptance of these units, and I think awareness and relationships with local banks versus big national banks make it easier to lend in this context.
Great, Ileana?
Yes, so what I've seen with my clients is that when they apply for a loan for these type of projects, the loan officers and the appraisers look at the square footage you're adding as part of the house, but they don't consider it as for the income, the potential for income. So they just look at it like you're adding another bedroom, another bathroom, and some random habitable space. This is a huge issue because there is no look for potential for income. So technically the loan will undervalue what the value to the property is. In the long term, once the homeowner can prove that it has had steady income for a significant period of time, say a year or two, then that space that you added sort of makes the value of the house jump, just because you can see that is an income generator. It's almost like having a dentist's office, you know, in your basement, or a commercial space, you know, and living upstairs. Right now, there is no format for appraisers to see additional dwelling units as an income generator. They just look at it just as a larger house. It's a huge issue that we, the professionals that were into this, are trying to convince mainly Fannie Mae to say, hey, this is not just more house, it is a new house. But they don't see it that way yet. Not sure if, I'm not sure how much more we'll have to push, but I'll be happy to be the one who kicks those doors.
Great. Yeah, so one thing that I'll mention is that there's another group that wasn't able to join us today, but it's called AddUp, or addup.house is their website, and I can share this in the resources. They are working on trying to make financing for ADUs more feasible, and so they can provide some advice on that, and they're also working on some of these policy issues. Several of us are trying to work on some of these policy issues, and by policy I mean lending policy. So what is Fannie Mae's approach to how they are financed? So that's sort of the next area that the policy folks are working on. So we are essentially out of time here. Let me go back to our resources page. Hold on one second here. Does anybody else, while I'm doing that, does anybody else have any other comments to close things out? No? Okay. All right. So again, I want to invite everybody to join the housingsolutions.mobilize.io group. You can check out all of our groups available, one of which is Accessory Dwellings in Arlington. We hope that you join us there to continue conversations about this. When you get the slides, you'll have a copy of some of these resources as well. We have some links to the accessory dwelling permit and building code tips pages from Arlington County. There's also a link to a property search page for Arlington, where you can find out what zoning category you're in, which is helpful for figuring out what some of the rules are. There are some really interesting guides and ideas around accessory dwellings. Particularly, there's a website that was created years ago in Portland called accessorydwellings.org, all focused on the Pacific Northwest and Portland, but they've got a head start on all this, so they have a much more developed system and industry up there. So it's really interesting to look at the examples and case studies that they've got on that website. The AARP put out a really nice ABCs of ADUs document, and so that link is available here. And then I mentioned before, in the DC area, we have this group AddUp that is available. They are in the process right now of adding Arlington's rules and regulations to their system. They will be able to produce some basic feasibility reports for Arlington properties starting about next week. So I appreciate everybody coming, and thank you very much. We will, like I said, any other questions that we did not get to answer live here, we will answer them offline and send out to everybody. So thank you all. Thanks to all of our panelists. A round of applause if we could hear everybody clapping. Thanks everybody.
Thank you.
Great, thank you.
Great, thank you, Michelle.